Hello, my name is Michael, and this is my video response to a video I watched as part of a class I am currently taking called TED, and TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. The video was called The Danger of a Single Story, and it's by a woman named Chimamanda Adichie. And there's a video link below so that you can watch that video after you watch my video, and hopefully you're as amazed by it as I was. Chimamanda Adichie is this novelist from Africa, and she warns us that if we only hear a single story about one person or about a country, we risk a critical misunderstanding. She argues that if we focus on the bad things, we flatten our experience and overlook many other good things. And she also argues that the single story deprives people of their dignity. And every time she mentions the single story, which is one of her key concepts in her TED Talk, she is referring to a stereotype, an ethnic notion, or any perception that we project onto someone or to a group of people or a country as a whole. And one thing I found interesting about her talk was that she talked about how when she was younger, she was an early reader and she was an early writer. And when she wrote, her characters exhibited qualities of the things that she read as a child, which was mostly Western literature. Therefore, her characters were white, they had blue eyes and blonde hair, and they were just the stereotypical, the personification of the literature that she was reading as a child. And she was confined to that single story of characterization. And it wasn't until she began to read other works, most specifically African literature, that she began to develop other characters that exhibited other qualities, and she began to write short stories with African protagonists. And I just thought that was so cool how she was able to broaden her horizons and began to discover new depths and new characterizations that she was able to come up with while writing. And that's just by breaking from the confines of that single story. Another thing that she pointed out was that as Americans, we tend to have a single story. We suffer from a single story of Africa, and that single story is pity. I could turn on the TV right now, and not even an hour into watching TV, I'd probably see 2 commercials, maybe 3, about poverty in Africa, about extreme hunger in Africa, and about civil war in Africa. When the truth is, all of that is not occurring in all of Africa. That's actually occurring in a very small area in Africa, not even half of the cities, and not even half of the countries in Africa, excuse me. And even Miss Adichie, she pointed out that she grew up in an upper middle class family. She had many things growing up. She was well off, and most of her friends and family were well off. And the fact is, most people in Africa are well off. However, we're constantly given this image of pity, and most of that could also be blamed on Western influence and Western media, but nonetheless, we're still suffering from that single story of Africa, and as Americans, we need to try to break free from it. Because it offends people, and it's not right. And so I found that very interesting about her video. There's also one thing that she said about stereotypes, and she acknowledged the fact that sometimes stereotypes are true. However, they're not balanced. They are incomplete, she said. And that really resonated within me for the simple fact that I wrote a college essay about ethnic notions and stereotypes. And in my opening paragraph of this essay, I had this vignette from my life, and I talked about how as a child, I always argued with this girl during recess about the skin color of God. I always thought God was black, and this little girl thought that God was white. And so each day we would gather on the playground and we would discuss our reasoning for why we thought God was either black or white. And one day I said, well, no, God is obviously black because God created Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve lived in Africa, and everyone from Africa is black, so God had to be black. And the little girl says, well, no, God is white because in the Bible God says, I am what I am. And if God were black, he would say, I is what I is. So she was suffering from this from the single story that she was under the influence and she was under the impression that all African Americans don't speak proper English. That was her single story of African Americans. And I myself suffered from a single story. I thought that only black people lived in Africa, that there were only black people in Africa. So, nevertheless, in the rest of my essay, I described how some ethnic groups, specifically African Americans, are beginning to accept these ethnic notions, are beginning to accept these single stories as truth, as fact. And that's not okay, because they're depriving their lives of significance and of worth, and they're not making the best use of their time, in my opinion, and of their life. And it's because they're confined by the single stories that society, that history has placed on them, and it's not okay. So I'm here not only to encourage viewers to watch Chimamanda Adichie's video about the single story, but I'm also here to encourage everyone to try to break free from these single stories. And Adichie, she concludes by saying, when we reject a single story, we regain a kind of paradise. And as many say, heaven is paradise, and heaven is the home of God. And though I still have yet to figure out whether God is white or black, I think that he'd use proper English nevertheless. And that's comforting. So, take care.